You know how sometimes when someone's trying to explain something to you or tell you a story, they get to a point in their explanation or their story where they kind of trail off or they seem to stop making sense or maybe even stop making eye contact with you or they start looking away. And it's at these moments that you realize that the person you're speaking with might actually not be fully aware of the implications of what they've just said, and so you need them to elaborate further. Now, when this happens, we can use a combination of open-ended clarifying questions to get the person to elaborate on what they've just told us. So, let's take a look at 3 different examples of open-ended clarifying questions you can use in these kinds of situations. All right, welcome back to another episode of English for Professionals. This is the show where we help you become more effective communicators in English in your professional lives. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our videos. And if you want to keep watching this video right here, I'm going to go ahead and read a situation to you. Listen closely and see if you can identify where the person needs to elaborate. The other day, I was at a conference, and there were all these young people there, and they were talking about how their company needed to change. They said they had too many meetings and they didn't have enough time to get work done. I asked them how long they'd been working at this company, but they wouldn't tell me. Instead, they kept talking about how their boss wasn't listening to them and how the management team didn't care about what they thought. I tried to ask them more questions, but after a while it became clear that they hadn't really thought things through. They were upset and frustrated, but I got the feeling that they weren't willing to listen to my perspective either. The way I see it, when young people get a job, they should give it at least 2 years. That's how they'll learn the most. But these guys wanted to quit and find another job after just 6 months. Now, I'm not saying that everyone should stay at the same company forever, but I think that before you leave a company, you should do everything possible to make your experience better. But these people seemed unwilling to do that. They just wanted to complain. Complaining is easy, but complaining without trying to solve the problem first, well, that's just not productive. Okay, so listen again. Pay close attention to the parts where the person isn't being very clear or where it seems like they're trailing off. So the other day I was at a conference and there were all these young people there and they were talking about how their company needed to change. They said they had too many meetings and they didn't have enough time to get work done. Now, you might want to stop him right here and say, "Tell me more about that." When someone says, "Tell me more about that," it's an open-ended question. It shows the person that you're interested in what they're saying, and it invites them to elaborate on what they've just told you. The person might not realize the implications of what they've just said, and asking them to tell you more about it can prompt them to elaborate and clarify their thinking. I asked them how long they'd been working at this company, but they wouldn't tell me. Instead, they kept talking about how their boss wasn't listening to them, and how the management team didn't care about what they thought. Here, you could ask the person to clarify. You could say something like, "What do you mean by that?" Or you could ask them to give you an example of what they're talking about. Saying, "What do you mean by that?" is a neutral question. It's not accusatory, and it doesn't put the person on the defensive. Asking for an example is also a good way to get the person to elaborate. When you ask for an example, you're showing them that you're paying attention and that you want to understand their perspective. By asking for a specific example, you're also helping the person to clarify their own thoughts. I tried to ask them more questions, but after a while it became clear that they hadn't really thought things through. They were upset and frustrated, but I got the feeling that they weren't willing to listen to my perspective either. In this part of the story, he's telling you his feelings about the people he met. He says he's frustrated, but he also says that they weren't willing to listen to his perspective. This is a bit judgmental because it's his opinion. He thinks that they weren't willing to listen to his perspective. Of course, it's possible that they weren't willing to listen to his perspective, but it's also possible that they felt he didn't understand theirs. The thing is, we don't know because he didn't ask them to clarify or elaborate. Instead, he just tells us his opinion. So whenever you're listening to someone tell you a story or explain something to you, use these open-ended questions to get them to elaborate on key points. This will help you to better understand their perspective, and it will also show them that you're paying attention. If you want to become a better English communicator, then make sure to check out the resources on our website. And if you enjoyed this lesson, make sure to leave us a comment down below and let us know what you thought. And finally, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming lessons.